Unfortunately, the predictions of even more prosperity to come for the American century would fail in the later few years of the decade when the nation would see a recession. This recession would only be followed by even more financial woes thanks to the Panic of 1907. Now, I don't know much about the New York Stock Exchange, and while I do like going down rabbit holes, even the idea of learning about stocks fills me with a combination of boredom and dread. So instead, I'll give a brief walkthrough of events courtesy of Wikipedia. Around mid-October, the New York Stock Exchange suddenly fell 50% from last year's peak. The panic was triggered by the failed attempt to corner the market on stock of the United Copper Company. When the bid failed, banks that had lent money to the cornering scheme suffered as people in droves went to withdraw their money in case those banks failed. This later spread to affiliated banks and trusts, leading a week later to the downfall of the Knickerbocker Trust Company, New York City's third largest trust. This panic would shake America's trust in the banking system, already dubious from the panic of 1893 in general. And many would rush to withdraw their money, causing a snowball effect where even more banks would suffer and fail. All this would only be stopped when J.P. Morgan, along with several other wealthy financiers, pledged large sums of their own money to banks, helping the failing banks as well as encouraging more trust in the banking system. The city of New York almost went bankrupt and would have if Morgan had not bought $30 million worth of bonds. This entire 3-week debacle led to the passing of the Aldrich-Vreeland Act of 1908, which established the National Monetary Commission to investigate the panic and to propose legislation to regulate banking. All of this had an impact on the average American, as it seems that those who have the least always suffer the most when wealthy people are bested by their own greed. Because many local banks failed, anyone who had money in those banks lost their money as well. Anyone who needed a loan couldn't get one. Unemployment spiked to 8%, about 2% lower than the recession of 2009. Employment was not the only aspect of our economy that suffered, as industrial production fell 11%, and imports fell by a whopping 26%. People lost their jobs, small businesses went bankrupt, and people generally had less money to go around. Even though production on farms greatly increased through this decade thanks to wider availability and technology, this did not produce as much wealth as was hoped by many farmers, as they found it hard to sell enough of their stock to make ends meet. An increase in the food supply is only great if you have an increase in demand, and the demand was not increasing. In fact, it was decreasing slightly as people were cutting corners wherever they could, including when it came to the dinner table. The value of their stock decreased due to the surplus, and so they had to sell more and make the same amount of money. Keep this in mind when we get to the 30s. It would take only a couple years for the economy to completely recover, but the effects on the average person were still notable. An economic disruption this bad will only be beat out by the Great Depression. For many people, rural and urban, this was a time where it was especially difficult to keep a roof over your head and food on the table. Many people would depend on their local communities for survival now more than ever in their lives. It is thanks to an already present culture of camaraderie and semi-collectivism that would help keep many people from poverty or homelessness, and the small businesses that managed to survive afloat.